Good evening. Welcome this week to devotions from around the kitchen table this evening. We're this summer and for several months now we've been looking at women of the Bible, and many of these women have names. Many of them did not have names. Some of them were prominent women. Some of them were slaves and very poor widows and the like. Whatever their role was in their life or in that society, they provided an important means and background and support to allow the missionaries to take the Word of God throughout the known world at that time, throughout their world, and thus it eventually ended up here where we have come to know the Lord as well. And so this evening, the woman we're going to look at today, and I can't talk about the woman without talking about her husband, because they both have names. Their story is found in the Old Testament in the book of Hosea. Now Hosea is found on page 1388 of my Bible. That may not do you any good. You might want to check. But Hosea and Gomer. Hosea's name means salvation, or he saves, or he helps, where Gomer's name means completion, filling up with idolatry and wickedness. Sounds like a strange name, doesn't it? But Gomer was raised by a father who dabbled in the cult, and they certainly didn't worship the God of Israel, and he was for him anything went. It's kind of a nihilism type of person he was. So it's no wonder that Gomer was raised up, and she grew up to be a prostitute of all things, or God calls her a whore or whoredom that she is involved with her in her occupation. So anyway, it's a great story. It's only 14 chapters, so you could read it in a very short time if you choose to read it. It'd be a good story for you to read, because in it God says to Hosea, he tells him, I want you to marry this woman, and then you will see firsthand how your relationship with her is like my relationship with my people. And you will be able to experience and understand the pain that I, God, go through. Hosea was a prophet during the reign of 4 different kings, spanning a period of some 38 years. This all happened in the 8th century BC. Gomer, on the other hand, was a promiscuous woman. And the Lord, this story, incidentally, is in Hosea, beginning in chapter 1 through chapter 3. But the Lord told Hosea, I want you to marry this woman Gomer. I want you to go out and find a promiscuous woman, or a whore, or a prostitute, as the Bible calls her. Now their life together enacted a prophecy pointing to the pain that God experiences in our sin, as I alluded to a moment ago, and the love that he feels for us despite our sin. Now the words of Hosea's prophecy concern the wrath of a spurned husband and the forgiveness of true love. Their life is a love story, but it's not the fairy tale kind of a love story. It was a love story that was full of pain and sorrow, and there were times of joy in it as well. Hosea was called to the ministry of a prophet early in his life. The book of that is named after him spans the duration of his lifetime. It covers his whole life. And what we see in the 14th chapters of the Bible are little snippets of his life devoted to the work of God. In Hosea's time, the Israelites were devoted to gods that they could make with their hands. Their primary devotion was to profits or making money and their own pursuits. The lesser gods whom they felt that they could control because they made them, it made them more comfortable in their lifestyles. Kind of like what we see happening today all around us, isn't it? And of course, if you read Hosea, you'll see time and time again how we've fallen away from God and how we've hurt God in our sin. Well, things had been going well for them all along, and this caused them to be cocky and arrogant. And instead of recognizing that God had blessed them, they thought of how wonderful they were and how much further they could take themselves. But slowly, God was withdrawing his blessing in his hand, and the tables were turning on them. The nations around them were becoming hungry. Their good fortune was running out. And instead of turning to God for help in their need, they held on stubbornly, trying to make it their own way. They gave themselves to the Assyrians, their enemies, and in the final blow of betrayal. And Assyria swallows them whole. Assyria almost wiped them out. Israel, and as a nation, we better be careful of that too. We want so much to appease our enemies, don't we? We better be careful. We better be careful. Well, Israel's overthrow and the life of Gomer make the most sense for us or to us through the lens of a betrayal or of a betrayed lover who's trying to save them from themselves. Both God and Hosea are trying to save their people from themselves. The prophecy of Hosea is filled with hope because it is not only a story of betrayal, but a story of ransom and renewal and restoration. We cannot clearly understand the life of the prophecy of Hosea without keeping in mind the perspective of a broken-hearted and betrayed God who wants his people back. Their whole selves, their hearts, he wants their all back to them. God asks Hosea to show Israel their heirs and through doing some unconventional thing. And then he told Hosea to marry an adulterous woman. First, God told Hosea to marry a woman known to be a wife of whoredom. You can see that in Hosea chapter 1, verse 2. And she already had a sketchy reputation because of the way she was brought up. She had a nasty reputation when Hosea married her, and things just went downhill from there. They had 3 children, and then she left Hosea. Gomer left Hosea. God told Hosea to name his children with ominous names, strange names. You probably wouldn't name any of your children with the names that Hosea named his children. God asked Hosea to name his kids after the spiritual reality that his life and marriage point to. Jezreel was a place of death and brutal carnage, and where atrocities were committed in the name of power and success. This was the name of Hosea's first son. He named his first son Jezreel. Lo Rumaha, which means no mercy, without compassion. And some translations say that it means not love. This was the name of Hosea's daughter, declaring the consequence of Israel's persistent sin. Lo Amini, which means not my people, is the name of Hosea's third child. It's a son. The Lo Ruhamah was his daughter. That was a strange name for a daughter, isn't it? No mercy. No mercy. But anyway, Lo Amini, which means not my people, was his third child, declaring that Israel, declaring what Israel had chosen to be. They had chosen not to be God's people. Even after all the ways God blessed them, they chose not to be His people. I'm afraid that as a nation we're choosing not to be God's people either. Maybe not completely. I guess maybe about half the nation still professes God. But we need to do something, folks, to turn around quick in order to get folks to turn their hearts back to God. Well, these are three names, or possibly the most ominous names that I've ever heard. I don't know about you, but you give your children names such as Jezreel, which was a site of carnage and devastation and murder, or your daughter, how about No Mercy, or Not My People? Certainly, it's a strange way to name children. Well, these children were not even guaranteed to be Hosea's biological children. Matthew Henry, who's a commentator, old biblical commentator, said that children by her, as everyone would suspect, though born in wedlock, might be begotten in adultery because of her background. Well, after Gomer left Hosea, God told him to go back and get Gomer. Go back and bring her back with you. Bring her back home with you. To take the woman back. Now the laws of the times, she should have been stoned to death by the laws of the times. And he was, not only did he take her back, but he bought her. He paid a price to get her back. The man that she ran to as she embraced her adulterous lifestyle wholeheartedly required payment. She, in essence, sold herself in slavery. Maybe he was pimping, who knows. But he required payment to release her back to her husband. Now the law required for Hosea to punish Gomer harshly. But instead he received her back into his home, paid the man for her what he wanted for her. Now I didn't calculate the amount of money that he paid for, but the Bible said it was 15 shekels of silver, a homer and a letek of barley. Yeah, I probably should have converted that, but you can do that. You can look that up. Whatever it was, it seems like a lot of money. Well, sin is serious, is it not? God hates sin. He loves the sinner, but He hates sin. This love story is really a story of curious kind, because it is not defined by an individual's passion, lust, or desire. On the contrary, it points out what those passions and desires really lead us to. And it holds up the power of the gospel as a lens by which we can better spot our own sinfulness. You know, in this story, if we're going to put yourself in this story, we are Gomer. The story of Hosea and Gomer in this story, we're not to identify with the hero, Hosea, which means he saves or God saves. God is the hero. He is Hosea in this story. We are the promiscuous Gomer who continues to leave her husband over and over again just to live in sin. Many who read this story want to hate Gomer. But we can't do that without consequently hating the sin within ourselves. Gomer's story challenges each of us to look inside our hearts and see how much faithlessness is actually inside of us. And then look up to see how much God is faithful to us. God is indeed Hosea in that story. Blazing forth in every chapter of this Old Testament story is the sacrificial love of Christ. Hosea and Gomer's story is indeed a gospel story. There are real consequences to our sin, but the love of God brings us back and forgives us, which is meant to change our heart. Change our hearts. So never ever forget. Never ever forget. No matter what you've done, no matter where you've roamed, God still loves you. He wants you back in His presence, and He desires that you live together in the lasting, loving, eternal relationship that He created you for. You think about that. Have a blessed week. You are loved. Amen.